the Barber lovers, said that he overheard as we all trooped out following Barber. One.
They were sitting up in the balcony.
Yeah, two men apparently sitting behind, further up. Watch this, and one said to the other, "Who does he think he is? Jesus Christ?" Which, of course, is a typical Australian expression of a response to one that is perceived as being above themselves.
A tall poppy.
A tall poppy, yes. And by the way, I forgot to mention one thing, that before we set off, of course, I drove the car into position where Barbara could come from the house and move into the car, and we had all gathered waiting for him to emerge. And when he did, it was in a very fine Indian suit that we hadn't seen before. It was long trousers, a jacket, a Nehru type jacket, buttoned up to the neck and buttons down, extremely smart, in blue grey, a blue grey colour. He looked so incredibly handsome. He really, it was, I tell you, he was a movie star. and we all, because we'd all gathered there waiting for him, and there was a sort of a gasp. Yeah. Oh, how beautiful. And Barbara then very carefully turned around so that, as it were, so that we could all admire his suit and his appearance, and then got into the car. It was a delightful moment, again, so one that one remembers so vividly. So then I drove him in. Now it could have been on that journey, that period while we waited for his plane to come. It could have been then. I remember, again, I'm not sure on which occasion, but two things happened. One was...
You went to the airport?
We went to the airport.
After the film?
After the film. This was the day that he flew back to India.
Yes.
In the evening, again, late evening, probably again, as it was in 58, about 10 a.m., 10 p.m., not a.m., 10 p.m., 10 p.m. evening. And so we drove in. Now, what I do remember was that we were seated with Barbara in a long row at one point in the terminal, in quite a long room, or a long section of the terminal, and there were a long row of seats, and Barbara was seated there with us seated around alongside him, and Barbara suddenly got up and walked up and down this space in front of us, and it was absolutely incredible. It was as though he floated. That incredible in movement, that flow. It was a flow that I don't know how to describe it. But again, an instant that stayed so vividly in my mind, and I'm sure in others. The other thing that happened, and I think it was at the same time, or the same occasion, Barbara said to me, through Erich, to get him a drink of orange juice. So I rushed off. And I remember travelling around the 2 or 3 terminals that were there, seeking one of the stalls to be open. I didn't find one. Then right at the end, I found one, and I asked for orange juice. They didn't have it. What they had was what you might call an artificial. I don't know what orange cordial is, but it is not orange juice itself, not fresh orange juice, but it's a flavour of orange. That's all I can say. I thought, well, it's the nearest I can get. So it was a plastic, no, it was like a paper cup. I think probably a wax paper cup mug. But I remember, and it was cold, and I knew that Barbara didn't like cold drinks. So I took it into the men's bathroom and filled one of the basins. And obviously I was able to fill it and must have had a plug, because I remember filling it with hot water and holding the container, just holding the rim so that it was in the hot water. Now, I don't know what difference it made, but I felt it and I thought, yes, it's a little warm. And so then I took it back to Barbara, and Barbara took one sip and then gave the rest to me to drink. I kept that container, but unfortunately it just disintegrated with time. There seemed to be no point in retaining a little mound of some material that would have eventually completely disintegrated. Well, it had disintegrated. Anyway, so that and saying goodbye to Bob, I don't remember. Probably it was the same as when we farewelled him in 1958, just a group of us, and that was that Barbara suddenly got up when the announcement came, boarded the plane, and walked off. Never looked at us, no gesture, no nothing, just walked off, and we stood there watching his back retreating. It was, to me, it was a good way. Now, to finish, before we set off, I must, perhaps if I can be a bit personal in this period, there was a little gathering before we set off on that final journey in the evening of, it was the evening, it was dark, but it wasn't that, at that time, the evening fell early. I don't know what it was, 6 p.m., 6:30, I don't know. But before we set off, I was with Barbara and Adi Senior, I remember that, and I think Dr. Nilu was there, and Francis in the hallway. And Barbara had Francis and I embrace.
Okay, so after the movie, you went back to Mayor House?
Yes, oh yes.
With the luggage and everything?
Oh yes.
And so now, okay, so you didn't go straight?
Oh no, oh no. No, we came back to Mayor House,
Okay.
Did whatever was necessary,
Yes.
and then the time for departure came. Now, if I can be personal, those 2 years from 54 when I first met Barbara to in other words, September, almost exactly 2 years. That 2 years was a very difficult period of adjustment for me. Frances lived with us, and we were a family in an incomplete house under difficult circumstances, and it was a very testing time for me. Not that there was no question of whatsoever of leaving Barbara. That just wasn't even thought of. All I was aware of was the extreme difficulty of living with somebody who was 17 years older than me, who had very little patience with marriage and bringing up children, except that he liked playing with them.
But he lived alone.
But he was a bachelor in his middle 40s or late 40s by this time. And at the same time, I was to, as directed by Barbara, I was to do what Frances told me, which meant, of course, that I had to cooperate and fit in even when I didn't feel like fitting in. And that visit was, you could say, was very significant for me. During those times, those days in Mayer House, two things happened. On one occasion, and I don't remember, but this was so typical. Barbara had a lot of little personal meetings with this one and that one. Again, it was so beautiful the way he mother-fathered us, as it were, all of us. He was so gentle and loving and kind and thoughtful about each and every one of us, in one way or another. Little things like gesturing to Joan and was there anyone else? It doesn't matter, but gesturing that to make sure that the children were well covered that night, because a cold wind would spring up, and one did. Right, just it was sort of typical. And at one point, Barbara called myself and Frances in to the big room, and I remember him sitting on the bed, on his bed, just along where it is now, no, not where it is now, where it was there, under the window. And Erich was the only one there. And Barbara said to Frances and I, among other things which I don't remember, but what stayed in very clearly in my mind was, I know that you two will stick to me to the end. That was one significant thing that happened. And the other was, and I wasn't there, but he said to Joan, again, at some point when she was with Barbara gestured that I love Frances first, most, or I love Frances first in Australia and Bill second. Why Joan told me that later. I wasn't there. But for whatever the reason, that's what he said to Joan. And so it was significant, that meeting and the final few moments in the house on August the 14th, on my birthday, that he had Francis and I embrace. And I said to Barbara, in a spontaneous way, Barbara, of course, this is your house. We will build elsewhere. And Barbara very emphatically said, no, this is your house. Live in it, but don't ever sell it. And what again, that to me was significant was that he confirmed that it was my house. That it wasn't Francis's, even though Francis was living in it and had given it to me, had ruled it over to me, but that was a confirmation. Not that it's important, but it makes me feel that, yes, I have to, it's my responsibility to leave it in the best possible way for future generations, because it, as Barbara said, how many years later? 13 years? No, yes, 13 years later he said that Mayer House, that Beacon Hill house, which is now had become known as Mayer House, was a place of pilgrimage. So that was, and then Barbara departed, and that, as I've said, it was a very significant period in my life with Barbara, J. Barbara.
Just one question I think people might be interested in. Could you talk a little bit about Francis while he was having his seclusion down in that room?
Yes.
Talk about the room and what it was like.
Yes. Francis' room was set just below to the side of the main house in stone. It was built against a rock, the rock ledge on which the house was sitting, and then the walls were built around it, and it was a very simple room. Of course, nothing other than a bed, and room for a small table.
The bed was like a stone bed?
Yes, but it was wooden on top of it. It was a rock ledge, a part of the rock of the whole rock hill that the house stood on, and the wooden slatted bed in which a mattress was then on. Was on top of that ledge.
Was there any water in it, or?
No. In other words, he could, he would take water down with him if he needed that during his riding or in the night. But everything else was in our kitchen, the common kitchen. He shared the house with us otherwise, apart from the sleeping quarters, like a bedroom. And it did.
So he slept down there even when he wasn't in seclusion?
Oh yes.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh yes. No, he didn't sleep in the house. That was his bedroom.
And he had like a desk down there?
And he had a small table on which he could write.
But during the seclusion, I had heard that he sort of, locked himself in.
Yeah, well, he made sure that he stayed in that room. Yeah, and then at each day, and I'm sorry I can't remember the detail. All I know is that Joan or I, one of us, took down the milk that he was allowed to have during those 28 days.
Wow, so he was fasting on milk alone?
Yes.
Right.
An indication of what the spiritual path means is not just sort of sitting in a nice comfortable armchair with the discourses, reading and saying, yes, right, the first plane, that'll be interesting. And the second plane, even more interesting. All right. You better. J. Barber. Two incidents to return to Barber's visit in '56 for a moment. There were two other instances that I remembered so clearly in driving Barber. One was we were travelling towards the house from the airport, and Barber gestured, "How far to go?" And I said, 5 miles. It was a very rough guess, but under the circs it didn't really matter. I said 5 miles, and there's a little silence, and all of a sudden Barber gestures again, "How far?" And I said 4.5. And again there's silence, nothing. And then all of a sudden Barber gestures again, "How far?" I said, 4 miles. And Barber then gestured. This was one of the ways in which we kept the driver awake and alert during the long musk trips in India. Yeah, a nice little personal touch. And the other occasion was, I can remember even the stretch of road. I can remember we hadn't left Beacon Hill we hadn't left very long, and so it was only a short distance in a certain section of the road that I remember, and Barber gestured. Well, it's impossible to stop thoughts. It is almost impossible to stop those thoughts becoming feelings. But you can stop the feelings becoming actions. And that message, directed to me personally, has been of incredible significance in my life. The longer I live, the more I realize how important it is not only to think of Barber all the time if one is able to, but particularly to think of him, to take his name when one has intense thought, feeling of whatever nature, whether it be lust, greed or anger, jealousy, envy, annoyance, irritation, whatever it be, how important it is to yes, one can't stop the feeling. The feeling is naturally there. One reacts because one has the impressions within one, that natural tendency towards lust, greed and anger, etc. Natural thoughts of wanting to be the leader, of being the leader, of irritation why people don't listen to one, longing to be accepted by people. All these issues, all of a sudden, when one stops the natural reactions that take place with the arising of thoughts and feelings, and trying to see them with a little bit of the light of Barber's name, all of a sudden one becomes much more aware of what's inside. The depth of the impressions that obviously we've accumulated over how many millions of lives that we've had. Anyway, that was a key factor in my life with Baba, and has helped so much in terms of assisting me to stay, well, at least by his grace, somewhat firm in my grip on his Dharman. Jai Baba. Okay, so the years 56 to 58. First of all, of course, there was much activity associated with Baba. Announcement during 56 that he would hold a big East-West gathering in 1957, and there was much activity, much correspondence back and forth over that. Then all of a sudden there was that Baba's second car accident, which again was an incredible shock. All of a sudden we get the news that he was so badly injured, and that it would appear at first that he would not walk again, but he said that he would. There was a great deal of turmoil.
Did you hear by telegram?
Yes, by cables and of course by letters, messages written by, and Baba's direction, written by money to all of us. Yes, there was that. I was responsible for preparing the lists. Baba would send word that these people had to come, and then there were those that wanted to come, and they would add the list, and then others would drop away.
So we're still talking
about that 57, yes,
yeah.
And then it was finally cancelled. But in the meantime, I was responsible for collecting whatever money which was necessary for the expenses in India, and you know, for the list back and forth. I think at the same time, yes, at the same time I wrote my first booklet, prepared my first booklet on Baba, which was read to Baba, and he was very happy with it, very pleased, and signed it, and everyone said it was excellent. And I do remember that it was agreed that Adi, that 1,000 copies should be sent to Adi Senior for distribution in India. Anyway, I do remember it was that all these are all things that kept alive, that the reality, and the reality of the connection between India,